Welcome back to Communicology. A handshake, a hug, and a kiss. What do these things have in common? They communicate through touch, and that is called haptics. Before we jump into today's video, please take a moment to like, share, and subscribe. I would greatly appreciate it. Let's jump in and talk about haptics. Now, we typically, again, this is one of those words we're just not used to hearing, used to seeing, but it's one of those things that, well, it's part of what we do. I mean, we as humans, we touch each other, we touch ourselves, and we do all kinds of stuff where we just touch all the time because, well, we have hands, we like to use them. We have lips, we like to use them. You know, we touch. That's just what we do because it's one of the things that makes us, well, human. And the study of it is called haptics. So when it comes to nonverbal communication, the concept of how we communicate through touch is haptics. So maybe you're familiar with this term recently because you've seen a lot of cars. You know, a lot of times the physical buttons are disappearing and it's more along touch based and they call haptic controls. Well, there you go, haptics. So the idea of it all being touch based instead of actually having a physical control, which of course that's been a disaster for the audio industry. Most people who go to haptic controls eventually go back because we like to touch. We don't just like to poke and put our finger pad on something. We actually like to feel a knob and turn it. Same thing with humans. We also like to touch, which is why it drove us crazy during COVID when we were told, stay 6 feet apart, don't touch, don't do anything, no hugs, no kissing, certainly that, not that, you know, no handshakes, nothing. And it's like, that's so wrong because that's not who we are. I mean, I like to shake hands. A good handshake means a lot to me. That's important. You know, some people like to fist bump, some high five, and some people hug. Some people do lots and lots of hugging, and they're very huggy people. You know, people like and enjoy touching. Even when it comes down to a lot of cultures, kissing upon greeting each other is normal. And you might even have a kiss on the cheek. It might be one of those fake air kisses where they pretend they're kissing on the cheek. But we like touch, and it's an important thing. It's what makes us who we are. So you think about the idea of touch, and it's quite simple why it matters. You think of where and how we touch a lot of times. It's some of the most sensitive parts of our body. I mean, if you poked your hand with a needle, it'll hurt, and it'll draw a little bit of blood, and you'll say, ouch. But if you poke yourself in a fingertip, man, that hurts even more. Like whenever we want to test if something is hot, we typically touch it, or if it's cold, we touch it, and we can tell right away because our fingertips are very sensitive. And it's one of those things that we don't like being jabbed or poked with it, and we don't like being burnt. We don't, all that kind of stuff, and that's where we feel it very closely. Also, our lips. Whenever we want to kiss somebody, why would we want to do that? It's kind of a weird thing. I'm gonna put my mouth in and your mouth, we're gonna stick them together, and it's a kind of a weird thing to think about if you think of it from a very practical standpoint. But from a haptic standpoint, your lips are super sensitive, and the other person's lips are super sensitive. So man and woman go together, they kiss, there you go. It's two sensitive parts touching, and there's a bit of a thrill to that, to having those sensitive areas touch. So you can see why something like a handshake or a kiss, why they carry so much weight. Also, the idea of like a hug. Why would a hug do that? Again, and we've talked about this before when we talked about the idea of physical space, and we talked about how intimate space at 0 to 18-inch zone, there are only so many people allowed in there. And you think of the idea of a hug, I'm bringing somebody who's from outside the space into that space, and not just in that 0 to 18 inches, but let's bring them to 0. So a hug brings them into that 0 space, and you put your arms around them and keep them there, and they hold you and keep you there. So it's like we are so important to each other that we want to embrace that 0 space. That's an important thing. I can feel you breathing, you can feel me breathing, and if our ears are to each other, I can hear you breathing. I can maybe even feel or hear your heartbeat because we're that close. So hugs are really important in doing that, because touch has and always will be something that it carries and shows that kind of intimacy. But it's also a thing that shows respect, and it shows some kind of level of understanding of each other. It's one of those things that whenever I'm teaching students how to get ready for interviews, I actually spend a long time talking about a handshake, which sounds weird to think about until you think about anytime you've ever flubbed a handshake. Yeah, I mean, you don't think about that until like, oh yeah, that's right. I have done that before. Yeah, we all have. So whenever you go shake a hand, what's the best way to do a handshake? And I ask them, I said, well, how do you do it? Describe it to me with words. And it becomes really hard to describe with words. So you start talking about like how the two hands come together. I said, whoa, before we even get there, what happens first? And they stop and they have to think about it. I mean, first you have to get close enough to the other person to do it. You can't do a 6 foot away handshake. You have to get close enough. So now you're taking someone who was out in that public space, and now they're coming into a personal space, and maybe even into an intimate space, depending on how close it is. And you bring them close, and you do the shake, right? No, not yet. We have to do eye contact. So now we move to the oculics that we've talked about before, and we have to have eye contact. Well, how can you do a handshake and eye contact at the same time? See, now we start getting to the trick of it, because again, the handshake really matters. So I look real quick to make sure I hold out my hand as a gesture saying, I'm ready to shake your hand, and you pull out your hand, and then we start moving close. I look real quick to make sure we're going to connect, and then it's all up to haptics after that. So far we used, kinesics, we used oculics, and we used physical space, and now we're moving into the actual haptics. So we start to put our hands together, and you basically connect the webbing of the hand. It's hard to do because I don't have two right hands to do this, but you connect the webbing together, and then you grab the other person's hand. So, and then you get your thumb on their thumb, and that's the first part. So the webbing, and then the grab, and the hold. That's step 1, 2, and 3, I guess, right? Well, that sounds so simple, but how firmly do you go together? Is it real soft? Is it medium? Is it hard? And then when you do the grab, how hard do you squeeze? And that's where you start getting all the weird discussions about what's appropriate and how appropriate. What if it's a man and a woman shaking hands? What if it's two women? What if it's a man and a woman, and the man and the woman are both in powerful positions, versus the man meeting a woman for the first time, meeting a woman that with whom he might be attracted to, have some kind of attraction, or two men, and you start having all these weird conversations about all these aspects, and it's just all we're talking about is interlocking and grabbing. And it's amazing how much you can get wrong there. Like, for example, what if you don't interlock? What if you grab short and you grab their hand? It's like grabbing a fish. That's a weird feeling, or like you don't quite grab right, and it's like, ooh, that's a weird. Like, how did I grab your wrist all of a sudden? What's happening there? So it's so it's like, okay, lock and grab and squeeze firmly, but not too firmly, and then we start having discussions about what it means to be firm and not firm. And it's fun watching students wrestle with this idea, but it's one of those things that you can just tell no one's ever talked with them about it before, because it's one of those things that you don't think about it until like, oh shoot, I'm going on a job interview, I need to know how to shake a hand. And like, how hard can it be to shake a hand? And everyone knows, as soon as this hand goes out like this, that's when you start feeling, oh no, we have to shake hands. And you please don't let it be a thing like this or whatever. And I've had these situations before. I threw off at one of my students one time. He went to shake my hand, and I went and I gave him like a bro hug kind of thing instead. It's like, and that threw him off because he was expecting a handshake, and I went like this, and he didn't know what to do. But it's just one of those things that you can be thrown off. Just again, it's just the get together and squeeze, and it gets messed up there. And then once you're there, you're not done yet. Do you You have to pump. How rigorously do you pump the hand? Just a small one. And how much? Just once, twice, 3 times? You just keep doing it as you're talking. How long do you do it? When do you let go? And all those kind of things come into play. And you're like, gosh, Dr. Talbert, why are you wasting so much time talking about a handshake? Because it's amazing, and especially in American culture, how important a handshake is and how much it communicates. And again, if you don't want to do about handshakes, we can talk about hugs. Well, what do you mean hugs? Like, aren't there right ways and wrong ways to hug? Oh yeah, absolutely there are. And there's multiple ways that you can hug, and there's multiple ways you can handshake, and there's multiple ways you can mix them. I mean, it's not very uncommon at all to see guys come together. They don't do a typical handshake. Sometimes they do a handshake and they like tap each other on the back, which is almost a hug. Like, we want to get close. And sometimes they'll actually do that. They'll lock their hands up like in the bro handshake like this, and they'll pull each other real tight, and they'll be like slapping each other in the back, like, yeah, how you doing, man? And they'll bump chests and everything like that while they're doing it. Well, women, you watch the way they hug, and it's different too. And even men and women when they hug each other, like, okay, do I grab low or do I grab high? Who grabs high? Who grabs low? And of course, a lot of it depends on how tall people are. Like, if the person you're hugging is tall, where do they put their arms? Where do you put your arms? Do you do one low, one high? And that gets a little bit weird. And guys, if guys are gonna hug and they know they're gonna hug, they do that kind of thing. They'll telegraph, like I said, like when you do a handshake, get your hand out there to show, hey, I want to shake your hand. Guys will do almost like this weird, like bald eagle thing where they'll hold their arms out like this or like this. That way the other guy knows to do this, because if I'm doing this, then you do this, and then we get our hands around each other this way, and usually lots of slapping on the back. Watch men when they hug. They almost always have to slap each other on the back. Why? I don't know. That's just what we do. But women do the same kind of thing. When they get together, like they come together like they're like a forklift picking up a load. Up and down, but they just come in like this. The other person comes in like this, and they come around and they hold. And sometimes they do that side to side rocking, pivoting thing at their waist. And that's what they do. And they don't slap each other in the back or anything like that. They just give each other the thing. But what they do is have the high pitched, shrill high that they always do when they hug. And it's a funny thing to watch men hug and watch women hug, because there's different rules for both of them and how we communicate. And again, it's communicating some level of intimacy, some trust, and some affection. Now, what's really funny would be if you were to switch it up. Like, can you imagine if women, ladies, try this sometime. When you go to hug another woman or a dude, walk up and say, yo, and hold him like this and slap him on the back of the hand like, Sarah, how are you? Yeah. And watch how they freak out, because that's so not right. And same thing, guys, if you go to hug somebody, just walk in with the old forklift hands like, hi, Steve. And watch how they freak out. Because, again, that's not normal. Guys come in like, yeah, and women come in, and that's how we get to do our hugging. And it's how we communicate. And you can see how people communicate through that kind of behavior, through hugging. And there are rules. And clearly, they're ones that we wrestle with, because, it's fun to watch people do these things. And you can watch from afar and see just how exactly they do hugs, how they do their high fives. One of the best examples of this, of course, is watching baseball. When someone, after they hit like a home run and they come in and everyone starts giving them high fives, or they bump forearms, that's a weird thing to do. But that's what some people do. They'll bump forearms. I think most of that comes because I might have a mitt on, and we can't do a high five necessarily, although they will high five each other's mitts. But it's just one of those things. If you have a bare hand and someone has a mitt, now it feels weird. I'm slapping your glove. So we bump forearms. Or what they'll do sometimes is they'll have like this, baseball players, when they get bored sitting in a dugout, they'll come up with all kinds of rituals like, all right, we're going to have this thing where we're going to slap, shake, up, bump, do this, have all this real weird long handshake thing going on. And it's kind of funny to watch them do that, but that's just, again, it's one of those things that, what are they communicating? What are they doing? And they'll have all kinds of rules behind it, and it'll make sense. And it'll make sense to them, and it'll be important to them. us on the outside watching it, like, I don't know what you're doing. It's so weird to do. And then, you look at other things that are acceptable and certain things that are not acceptable. Like, for example, you watching football. It happens in other sports, but mostly football. Like, if something goes really, really well, if someone does a really good job on a play, what do football players do to that person? They slap them on the butt. Don't know why, but hey, good job, number 23, wham, and they'll slap on the butt. And they'll go back to the bench and everyone's slapping them on the butt. Slap them on the butt. Good job there, way to stick it there. All right, well done. Slap them on the butt. Again, that's a way they're communicating to each other. I don't know why slapping on the butt communicates a thing in football, but that's part of the culture. That's what they do. Now imagine taking that culture into the workforce. Good job on that report, Karen. Whack. And now you've got a sexual harassment suit. It's weird that it's allowed and perfectly acceptable in football, but not at the office. But again, that's a cultural thing that we have to wrestle with. What's allowed here is not necessarily here, and what's here is not necessarily there. And just like with hugging, you can't just walk up and hug strangers. I mean, you can, but they probably won't like it. You're not supposed to just walk up and do all kinds of things. You just walk up and kiss somebody. You can't do that either. So, there are rules in how haptics work. Because, again, if I look at you, that oculesics thing, I can communicate with my eyes a certain thing. But at the end of the day, the worst thing you're doing is maybe staring at somebody and they think you're a creep. But with hands, you could actually grab people and commit, some kind of assault. It doesn't have to be, haptics as in a fist. We typically think of that aspect of a fist to the jaw. That, that's obviously haptics too. But, it's amazing what you can do with hands that can get you in trouble otherwise. So there are all kinds of rules of things we need to be thinking about with those kind of things, because we communicate touch in so many different ways. Look at the way people hold hands, and I'll tell students this all the time. Just watch out a window sometime and just watch people as they interact, like out on the quad, and you watch them interact, and you can tell the level of their friendship, the level of their relationship. Like if they stand far apart, we talked about this in another video, like they don't want to be close, and when they come together, do they high five? Do they shake hands? Does the guy kiss the woman on the hand, like old school? Do they hug? How do they hug? What kind of things are going on there? And when they leave, how do they say goodbye? And when they're together, what are they doing? Punching each other on the shoulder and goofing around, all kinds of stuff that happen there. Are you paying attention to how touch communicates? Because it's one of those huge things that we do. It's one of those things that's also really confusing, not just in the business world or sports world, but just even like I mentioned before, in the dating world. Like, when's it okay to hold hands? Like is that something that you could do on a first date? Sure, I guess. Like you're watching a movie, could we hold hands? What if I put my hand on your leg? Is that okay? Well, where on the leg? Because that changes things. Is it just on the knee? Is it on the top of the leg? Is it top of the leg with a hand over onto the inner thigh? And you can see like instantly things change and escalate just because of just a simple thing of touch. And it's one of those things that we kind of take for granted in the moment until like all of a sudden you start feeling the pressure of like, ooh, what do I do here? And then you start recognizing that. So when is it okay to hold hands? And when you hold hands, do you hold hands this way or do you interlock fingers? How do you walk? When you're walking down the street with your boo and you're holding hands, how do you do that kind of thing? Again, touch is an amazing thing. And haptics are really interesting to study because, again, they teach a lot. I talked about when I was doing Oculix, the idea of when you walk down the sidewalk, wink at everybody you pass and see what happens. Well, it's the same thing with haptics. When you go down and walk down the street or down the sidewalk, offer a high five to everybody that you pass or a fist bump to everybody you pass. See what happens. I mean, it's a different kind of a thing. Obviously if you wink at people, they might think it's creepy, but if you offer a high five to people, they actually kind of enjoy it. It's kind of a weird thing, like oh, that's kind of neat. Like, well, I wonder what that's all about. I've done that before with students. Like I've finished class and I've walked by the door and I've offered everybody a fist bump as they walked out, and they don't know how to process it because professors typically don't do that, and professors typically don't fist bump either. So it's one of those things that it's a fun little thing to do, and they don't know how to process it because, well, quite frankly, It's just not normal. But they get a kick out of it. I remember at graduation, like typically graduation, a lot of times faculty will form like a gauntlet, like a tunnel, and all the graduating students have to walk through, and we applaud them. And then occasionally I'll see one that I know, and I'll reach out and give them a fist bump, like a congratulatory fist bump. And they're really even in that moment they're kind of confused because, they're in a daze anyway because they're just walking. There's all these faculty everywhere. Everyone's applauding. They actually graduated. They're overwhelmed with the emotion and the experience. And then here's one of your professors offering a fist bump. And it's just one of those things that's weird. And then I'll try to find them later. And if I find them later, I'll offer them a handshake. Again, two totally different environments. Ones that are just funneling through. So a fist bump is quick and easy. You don't have to fumble with that. But when it comes to afterwards, like, no, really, good job. Congratulations. Well done. And that's a different kind of thing. So again, you look at those moments and you look at other moments, like, for example, like a wedding. What's the final thing that really that ends the wedding ceremony? I pronounce you man and wife. You may now kiss the bride. It's like, that's the thing. So all beforehand, there's all kinds of haptics happening. Like they're holding hands. They're putting actually the touch of putting rings on each other. And then they turn and present the couple and say, you may now kiss the bride. And like, boom, that seals the deal, as it were. Like you've now done it. You're now married. You may now kiss her. She's now, and make her officially the bride by kissing her, as if like that's the thing. But that's just goes to show how important haptics is. So a business deal is the same thing. Shake on it. Let's shake on it. Once you shake your hand, that means you now have my word. So not just the physical word, but we've actually touched hands, and we've made it an official deal. And that's an important signifier that we have that shows how important haptics are. So that's what I have for you today. I thank you very much for tuning in. As always, please like, share, and subscribe. And if you didn't like what you heard, that's okay. Thanks for tuning in this long anyway. But I'll see you next time on Communicology.